My husband left me for my stepsister, my father paid for their wedding, and my entire family supported them. But years later, he came crawling back begging, and what I did left them all speechless. I'm 34 years old. I work in accounting, and there are still days when I have a hard time believing that all of this actually happened. My ex-husband left me for my stepsister. My own father attended their wedding, and basically my entire family chose to side with them. It sounds like one of those dramatic stories you see on TV. You know, the kind you think are so over the top they can't be real. But I swear that every word of what I'm about to tell you is true. I guess I should start at the beginning. My mom died when I was 22. Ovarian cancer. It was horrible. My dad, Henry, was devastated. Or so I thought at the time. I had just married Timothy that same year, like 6 months before Mom died, so I was trying to process my own new life while dealing with grief. My dad was alone for like a year and a half, maybe 2. I don't remember exactly. And then he met Ruth at one of those support groups for widows and widowers. Ruth had a daughter my age. Well, technically she was 4 years younger than me. Her name was Lindsay, and she was like 20 when my dad and Ruth got married. At first, everything seemed fine. I mean, it's not like I was thrilled that my dad was remarrying so quickly after Mom's death, but I wasn't going to be selfish about it either. He deserved to be happy, right? And Ruth seemed nice, a little nosy maybe, but nothing terrible. Lindsay was another story. From the moment I met her, there was something about her that made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't identify exactly what it was. She was pretty, that's for sure. Blonde, light eyes, always dressed like she was about to go to a photo shoot. And she had this way of acting that was like too sweet. You know what I mean? Like those people who are so nice that you know something's not right. Timothy and I were doing well in those early years. We had Zoe when I was 26, and Gabriel 2 years later. He worked at a consulting firm, made good money, and I had stayed home with the kids because, honestly, with 2 small children and what daycare would have cost, it didn't make much sense for me to work. It's not like we had a mansion or anything, but we were comfortable. You know, we could pay the bills without stress and maybe go out to dinner once in a while. The problem started when Lindsay began showing up at our house more frequently. My dad and Ruth lived like 30 minutes away from us, and Lindsay was supposedly studying at community college but seemed to have a ton of free time. She would come visit us, said she wanted to spend time with the kids, with her niece and nephew, even though technically we weren't blood family. But whatever. And at first I thought it was sweet. The kids adored her, especially Zoe, who was like 3 at the time and thought Lindsay was the coolest thing in the world. But then Lindsay started making weird comments. Little things that made me uncomfortable, but sounded so innocent that I wondered if I was imagining things. Things like, "Oh, Timothy, you must be so tired from working so hard. Allison is lucky to have you." Or, "Timothy, I love your shirt. You look so handsome." Or the worst one, "It must be difficult for you. Timothy, with Allison at home all day with the kids, you must miss having adult conversations." And she would say it in front of me, with that little smile, and Timothy would laugh uncomfortably and I would just stand there thinking, does nobody else find this weird? The thing is, when I mentioned something to Timothy, he said I was being paranoid, that Lindsay was just being friendly, that I was jealous for no reason, that I was overreacting. And maybe at first I believed him, because, I don't know, when everyone tells you you're crazy, you start to doubt yourself, you know? But the comments continued. Lindsay started dressing differently when she came to the house, like more provocatively, tight jeans, low-cut tops, and she always found excuses to touch Timothy, like touching his arm when she laughed at his jokes, or asking him to help her with something heavy even when it was obvious she didn't need help. The moment I knew I wasn't imagining anything was one day when I was in the kitchen, making dinner, and Lindsay and Timothy were in the living room with the kids. I was chopping vegetables and I heard them talking. And Lindsay was telling Timothy something about how he deserved someone who appreciated him more, that it was obvious he worked very hard, and that some people, looking at me, clearly, didn't value everything he did. And Timothy, instead of telling her to shut up or that it was inappropriate, just laughed nervously and said something like, "Oh, well, we all have our difficult moments." I froze with the knife in my hand, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. That night, after Lindsay left, I confronted Timothy. I told him he needed to stop being nice about Lindsay's behavior, that it was obvious she was trying to seduce him or something, and that he needed to set boundaries, and he exploded. He told me I was being ridiculous, that Lindsay was basically my sister, which technically wasn't even true because we were only stepsisters, that I was projecting my own insecurities, and that he was tired of my constant accusations. Constant accusations? He said, as if I had been bothering him with this for years. When I had just started mentioning it, I decided to talk to my dad. I went to his house one Saturday morning, without the kids because Timothy stayed with them one of the last times he actually acted like a father before everything went to hell, and I told my dad about Lindsay's behavior. I explained the comments, the insinuations, the way she dressed, everything. And he looked at me like I had just said the most absurd thing in the world. Allison, he told me, I think you're misinterpreting Lindsay's kindness. She's just trying to be part of the family. Ruth was there too, and she basically attacked me. She told me I had always been jealous, that I never really accepted her marriage to my dad, and that now I was trying to cause problems between her and her daughter. I was sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? But they weren't kidding. My dad took Ruth's side, told me I needed to apologize to Lindsay, and practically kicked me out of his house. The next few months were hell. Timothy and I fought constantly. He was increasingly distant, came home late from work, spent more time on his phone, and when I asked him what was wrong, he told me nothing, that he was just stressed about work. Lindsay kept showing up, but now there was this horrible tension in the air every time she was around. I tried to stay calm for the kids. Zoe was like 5 by then, and Gabriel was 3, and they could feel something was wrong even though they didn't understand what. One night, Timothy came home from work, looked me straight in the eye and told me he wanted a divorce. Just like that, without any prior conversation, without couples therapy, without anything. Just, I want a divorce. This isn't working. I'm not happy. I was in total shock. I asked him if there was someone else, and he swore there wasn't, that he just needed space, that our marriage had been dead for a long time, news to me, because I thought we were going through a rough patch, but that we could fix it. I begged him to reconsider. For the kids, if not for me, and he just shook his head and said his decision was final. He moved out 2 weeks later. He rented a small apartment like 20 minutes away. The kids were devastated, especially Zoe, who didn't understand why Dad had left. Gabriel was too young to fully comprehend what was happening, but he could feel the tension and started having trouble sleeping. I was functioning on autopilot, getting up every morning, feeding the kids breakfast, trying to maintain some kind of normal routine while my world fell apart. And then, like 4 months after Timothy moved out, I received an invitation. A wedding. Invitation. Timothy and Lindsay were getting married. I stood there staring at the envelope in my hands for I don't know how long, feeling like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't believe it. Well, I could believe it. Because deep down I think I always knew. But seeing it there on paper, official, was like getting punched in the face. And what killed me was that the invitation came from my dad and Ruth. They were organizing the wedding, they were going to pay for it, they were completely in favor of all of this. I called my dad. I screamed at him over the phone, told him how could he do this? How could he support Lindsay after she had destroyed my marriage? After I had come to him asking for help, and he had ignored me. And he told me, and I'll never forget this, he told me, Allison, you need to accept that Timothy and Lindsay fell in love. These things happen. You can't hold a grudge against them forever. As if I was the bad guy in the story for being angry that my stepsister had seduced. My husband and my father was celebrating it. I didn't go to the wedding, obviously. I stayed home that day with my kids, crying while watching Disney movies with them, trying to explain to Zoe why Dad was marrying Aunt Lindsay. She still called her Aunt Lindsay at that point, which broke my heart. The financial support Timothy gave me was a joke. The divorce agreement stipulated he would pay me child support, but it was the absolute minimum required by law, and it was never enough. We lived in a small rental house. I was using food coupons, trying to make every dollar stretch as far as possible. It was during this time, when I was at my lowest point, that I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just sit around waiting for my life to magically get better. I needed a career. I needed to be able to support my children. I needed financial independence. So I started researching adult education programs and enrolled in community college to study accounting. I had always been good with numbers, and it seemed like something practical, something that could lead to a stable job. The first few months were brutal. Getting up early, taking the kids to daycare, which I had to pay for with student loans because there was no way I could afford it otherwise, going to classes all day, picking up the kids, making dinner, helping with Zoe's homework, putting Gabriel to bed, and then staying up late studying. I slept like 4 or 5 hours a night, lived on coffee and pure determination. There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when I thought I couldn't do it, that it was too much. But then I met Kimberly in one of my classes. She was also a single mother, had 2 kids a little older than mine, and we were in the same situation, like trying to juggle everything at the same time. We became friends almost immediately. We studied together, took turns babysitting each other's kids when one of us had an important exam, supported each other on difficult days. I know if I would have survived that first year without her, honestly. Timothy, meanwhile, was living his perfect life with Lindsay, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. He would come pick up the kids every other weekend, when he remembered, because sometimes he'd cancel at the last minute with some excuse. And they would come back telling me about the new house where Timothy and Lindsay lived, about the nice things they had, about the fun outings they did. And I had to smile and act like I was happy for them, while inside I was dying of envy and pain. My dad and I basically stopped talking. He would call me occasionally, trying to act like nothing had happened, like he hadn't chosen Ruth and Lindsay over me, his own daughter. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. So our conversations were short, awkward, full of long silences and generic comments about the weather. It took me 3 years to finish my accounting program. 3 years of working, harder than I had worked in my life. Of sacrificing sleep and social life. Not that I had much social life anyway. Of living on the financial edge. But I did it. I graduated with honors, in fact, which I didn't even think was possible at first. And when I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, with Zoe and Gabriel in the audience screaming, "Mom," Gabriel was almost 7 by then and Zoe was 9. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt pride. Getting a job was harder than I expected. I sent like 50 resumes to different accounting firms, big and small, and I got constant rejections or just silence. I was starting to panic, thinking maybe I had made a mistake, maybe I should have studied something else. When I finally got a call from a small firm, it was an office with like 10 employees. They did accounting for small and medium-sized businesses in the area, and they offered me an entry-level position. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was more than I had earned in my life, and it came with benefits, including health insurance for me and the kids. My boss, Mr. Phillips, was an older man, like in his 60s, who had founded the firm 30 years earlier. He was strict but fair, and for some reason he saw something in me. He gave me opportunities to learn, assigned me to more complex clients as I demonstrated I could handle the work, and listened to my ideas, even when they came from the most junior person in the office. I worked my butt off during that first year, arriving early, staying late, making sure every number balanced perfectly, every report was flawless, and it paid dividends. About a year and a half after I started, Mr. Phillips called me into his office and offered me a promotion. More responsibilities, my own set of clients to manage, and a significant salary increase. I accepted immediately, obviously. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was actually building something, that I was creating a stable life for me and my kids. Things with Timothy started to change too, but not in the way I expected. He started calling me more often. Not just to talk about the kids, but like wanting to chat. Asking me how I was, what I had been doing. At first, I thought he was being nice. That maybe he was finally maturing and trying to have a better co-parenting relationship. But then one night he called. It was like 11 at night, and he told me he needed to talk to me about something important. He came to my house the next day. The kids were at school. He sat on my couch, the same couch we had bought together years ago when we were still married. He had kept most of the old furniture because he and Lindsay had bought everything new. And he told me he had made a mistake. That leaving me had been the biggest mistake of his life. That Lindsay wasn't what he thought she was. That she was controlling, that they fought all the time, that he had realized that what we had together was special and he had ruined it. I sat there listening to him, and the weirdest thing happened. I thought this was the moment I had been waiting for years. You know? The moment when he would realize what he had lost, when he would come crawling back asking for forgiveness. But sitting there listening to him talk, all I felt was, like, nothing. Well, not nothing. I felt something, but it was like detachment, almost like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. I told him no. I told him I had spent the last few years rebuilding my life, building a career, raising our kids basically alone, and that there was no way in hell I was going to let him come back and ruin all of that. That he had chosen Lindsay, had chosen to destroy our family, and now he had to live with those consequences. He tried to argue, told me we could go to therapy, that we could start over, but I stood firm. I asked him to leave. After he left, I sat on my couch for I don't know how long, processing what had just happened, and I realized something. I realized I had finally closed that chapter. I was no longer waiting for him to come back. I was no longer fantasizing about things going back to the way they were before. I had truly moved on. Not just telling myself I had moved on, but actually feeling it. Things got a little more complicated after that. The consulting firm where Timothy worked had financial problems. Something about losing a big client. And they ended up having to make massive cuts. Timothy lost his job. And like a month later, his lawyer contacted mine saying he needed to reduce child support payments because he had no income. I was furious. Like, how dare he? But my lawyer explained that technically it was his right to request a modification based on change of circumstances. I didn't fight the temporary reduction in payments, which probably made me look like a saint in the eyes of the court, but what I did do was negotiate something better. My lawyer suggested we establish a trust fund for the kids' college education, and that instead of just reducing the support payments, Timothy would contribute a certain amount to that fund each month once he got back to work. And it worked. The judge agreed. And now there's money set aside for Zoe and Gabriel for when they go to college. Money that Timothy can't touch for anything else. Timothy got another job eventually. Something at a smaller company with a lower salary. And from what I know from the kids, things with Lindsay didn't improve. In fact, I think they're worse. The kids mention fights, mention that Lindsay complains about Timothy constantly, mention tension. And I'm not going to lie. Part of me feels a karma-like satisfaction about it, but another part just feels pity. Pity that Timothy ruined something good for something that glittered but turned out to be fake. My relationship with my dad is still practically non-existent. He tries to call me on my birthday and on holidays, but our conversations are superficial. Ruth and Lindsay are rarely mentioned, as if he knows that mentioning them would be crossing a line. The kids still see him occasionally. He's their grandfather after all, but never when Lindsay is present. I set that boundary years ago, and I've stuck to it. These days, life is, I don't know, quiet, I guess. Quiet in a good way. I have my job, which I really enjoy. I have my small house that I was finally able to buy like a year ago. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I have my kids, who are now 12 and 10 and are becoming really incredible people despite everything they've been through. Zoe wants to be a veterinarian. She's obsessed with animals and volunteers at a local shelter. Gabriel is this sweet, sensitive kid who loves to read and write stories. Last Saturday, the three of us were in the kitchen making pancakes, which is our weekend tradition, and Gabriel asked me if I ever thought about getting married again. I told him I honestly didn't know. That maybe someday, but I wasn't in a hurry. That I was happy with our little family just the way it was. And Zoe said, "I'm happy too, Mom." And then Gabriel nodded and said, "Yeah, this is good." And they were right. This is good. More than good, actually. It took years to get here. Years of pain and hard work and nights of crying and self-doubt. But we got here. And that's enough for now.